think of. In terms of emotions with food, with dietary behaviors, you can have emotional reactions to food. You can have a variety of different reasons for eating. And a lot of times those, as we'll talk about, deviate positive and negative. You know, in the South in particular, we've become conditioned socially to make a whole lot of interactions around food. Most of it not particularly healthy food is a part of what we do every time we get together. And a negative are much easier to identify. When you've had a bad day, you have a difficult set of emotions, it's easy to overeat or eat the wrong kinds of foods as a way to compensate for that. And then also like triggers for that sort of stuff. Sometimes emotions provide a really strong trigger for eating. Other times it can be environmental and almost completely invisible. You just learn to eat in certain situations, as we'll talk about in a minute. Before we get into how that specifically relates to food and dietary intake and just health behaviors in general, it's probably pretty useful to understand just a little bit more about what I mean when I say emotions, because we all kind of have a definition for that: feelings, emotions, any sort of experiences you have on those dimensions, but they all serve a purpose. Emotions actually have a functional value. If you're happy when you engage in something, it's your brain's way of telling you, hey, you want to do more of that thing. If you're sad or you're angry or you react negatively to a situation, it's usually an indication that you want to avoid it in the future, which leads to problems sometimes. If you always avoid a negative situation or one that pushes you toward a negative behavior, you can't learn better methods of dealing with it. That's a difficulty for a lot of people that end up with unhealthy dietary habits. But the ultimate purpose of these things is just to provide information. We very frequently separate emotions into good or bad, based on how they feel for us. Like we'd like to experience that again, it's good. We'd like to avoid that as much as we can, it's bad. But inherently, they aren't good or bad. They just are. They're cues to orient you to your environment. And it's related to survival. Fear is a real easy one that we'll use for an example in a minute. If you're a wild zebra and you hear a rustle in the jungle someplace and you run away and you survive, your fear actually had a very strong adaptive value. It was useful for something. It doesn't matter if that noise was a lion that was going to eat you or if it was a little bird that just made racket in the bushes. You got away from that situation, it was rewarded somehow. You feel better, you're not afraid, you survived that interaction. Often with negative emotions, it can feel a whole lot like these things just kind of come out of nowhere. They just happen to you, especially when you're talking about health behaviors, exercise, dietary changes, anything that you're doing to try to make better habits for preparing for surgery. But they don't actually just happen. They have environmental context and they have three particular parts. It's your thoughts, your feelings, and by feelings, I don't mean emotions. I mean like the way your body feels when you experience certain things, and then your behavioral responses. You can see these things depicted in a picture. If you heard one of these talks before, you might have seen this exact picture. Thoughts and behaviors are at the top of a triangle with feelings at the bottom. They're related this way because if you can understand what somebody thinks and you can understand what they do, you should be able to pretty directly predict what it is their body feels like. The thing at the bottom is a consequence of the other two. A simple example that I use real often to explain this concept is what would you do if you're just walking to your job, your house, someplace outside, you walk around a corner and you run headlong into 1,000-pound black bear. Now, that's not a situation that you probably encounter regularly. Hopefully, you've never encountered that at all because it's kind of dangerous. A big bear, it could easily maul or kill you. Most people don't have a hard time thinking in that situation, I need to run away. I need to get out of here because this is scary and it's objectively dangerous. The things that happen in their body tend to be pretty common across people too. Your heart speeds up, you sweat, you shake, you might get sick at your stomach, your vision narrows, you could feel dizzy, all that kind of stuff that indicates you're afraid of something. Your body is scared. And then as a consequence, it's pretty easy to see how you want to be somewhere else. You really effectively have three choices in this situation when you encounter something as objectively terrifying as a bear. One is fight, and that's not a great selection because you ain't gonna win against 1,000-pound bear. One is flight, escape, get away from there, and then the third is freeze. Freeze mostly doesn't work in a lot of situations, but every now and again it can be useful. In this situation, you'd rather freeze than fight, but the easiest thing is to get away from there. And that's the way we react really frequently to a lot of negative emotions. If you can avoid the situation that caused them, it's a whole lot easier for you to contend with that feeling because you can put it away from you. You feel better in the short term when you get away from it. Sometimes that can have sneaky effects, though. Like your learning history matters a whole lot to what you think in any given situation. The extension of the example with the bear is most of us would be terrified in that situation. If you walk around the corner and you see a bear, a couple of feet from you, you don't have a framework to understand what's happening. But if you grew up in a circus and you train bears and this is your bear, you're just like outside looking for him. You turn the corner and there he is. You don't have those same thoughts that everybody else would in that situation. You're not terrified because you know exactly what to expect. Your learning history to whatever point in life you encounter that bear dictates what you're going to think about it. For most of us, we've learned over the course of our lives that big wild animals are probably dangerous. But for somebody who would learn the opposite and they knew this bear, they're very unlikely to have a negative or fearful reaction to it. Your learning history is exactly the same for health behaviors and for food. That real frequently you might have learned over the course of your life that when something bad happens, you eat junk food as a method of dealing with it. It's inherently reinforcing. Your body is actually built to prefer that kind of food because it's so calorie dense. When you eat something, really fatty, fried, sugary, whatever it is that is unhealthy, your body craves that because it's got so many nutrients per volume of what you eat. It's real easy to get stuck on that behavior. If you learn at a young age that this is how you deal with negative emotion, it becomes habitual. And it may become so habitual that you don't even notice it anymore. You just end up engaging in it anytime you're stressed or experience negative emotion. That's bad enough by itself because all of us encounter stress. And if you've had the learning history that supports that kind of approach to these sort of foods, it's really easy for you to not notice it. But it also can happen on the other side for positive events. You might have also grown up in a household that rewarded positive behavior with food. The example we have on the slides here is somebody gives you ice cream every time you got good grades or something positive happens, your whole family goes out for pizza and sugary sodas. You can condition that effect too. So basically, anytime you deviate from a normal resting state where you're not happy or sad, you're not activated positively or negatively, anytime you change from this condition up or down, you end up craving food, often food that you don't really want to be eating when you're trying to lose weight, because almost always when people are doing one of these things, it's unhealthy food. You may also form beliefs about the way your efforts relate to your weight loss. This is where I try to remember today to use myself as a personal example. I was in school forever, to get a PhD. I ended up taking a job as a college professor and also run a practice. I work all the time, gained a lot of weight. At some point, like I realized that this is unhealthy, is slowing me down. But when I was a kid, I used to be an athlete. I knew how to get in shape and to eat right and to do the things necessary to lose weight. It gave me confidence to be able to make those changes. And over the last 2 years, I've lost 80 pounds, trying to maintain, better health through habit change. But I believed I could do it because I had a learning history that supported it. Many of us don't have that. We've gone a long period of time. We've gotten to be unhealthy in our habits. We don't even realize we don't have confidence that we can do the things that are necessary to make behavioral changes. That learning history kind of supports a negative emotion when you go into these events, as we'll talk about if we get far enough in the time that we have. Exercise is one of those things that your mind matters a great deal to whether or not you're able to maintain it. In terms of eating behaviors, emotion then can play an awful big role in what, when, and how much you eat. Also, why, your motivations for doing these things. A common example that many of you may have experienced that we wrote out an example for Abilene here. She's had a bad day at work. Somebody dumped some stuff on her. It was stressful. Somebody else was mean and rude. She had a hard time. She skipped lunch to try to keep up with all the extra stuff that somebody had piled on her, maybe unfairly. She just forgot, tuned out, rushed around like she was on fire all day long and didn't eat. And then when she's headed home, she realizes, oh, I didn't eat today, and she's starving. So she stops by the fastest place to be able to obtain food, which is very frequently a drive-through. And as you might be able to predict, if she's starving because she hasn't eaten all day and she's had a terrible day and she's stressed, the combination of those things ends up leading her to order way too much food. Whereas she might have gotten one thing, if she'd gone through it at a regular lunchtime and it wouldn't have been extremely unhealthy. Now she's starving, she's stressed, she's not paying attention. She's going to order two or three things, all of which are unhealthy. And then she's going to end up engaging in behaviors like eating too fast. This happens to everyone when they've missed food. If you're used to eating on a regular schedule and you're over hungry, almost always will eat too quickly. When you do that, your brain can't catch up with your stomach. You end up putting in more food than you really need because your brain doesn't have time to say, hey, stop, turn that off. And it starts with like negative emotion and stress. If she had identified at the beginning of this process, hey, this is stressful, my day is not going right, I'm in a bad way already, she could have been on guard for different behaviors about the way that she ate and made really, really sure that she ate lunch because she knew down the line what was coming was a trip to the drive-through and having way too much food as a result. And then you can see this on a positive side too. It's not weird if something good happens to you to want to celebrate it. Like if Abilene for putting up with all this stuff at her job and continually having things dumped on her and engaging in stressful interactions was eventually rewarded by being promoted, that's usually a big deal to people. And as we were talking about before, Southern culture in particular is set up around food. When something good happens to somebody and you want to celebrate, you tend to do it around food. It's not weird to take everybody or at least like your close friends and family, and go out to a restaurant and end up splurging on unhealthy foods. Sometimes drinks, you have two or three drinks in that kind of context too. And then you're really not paying attention to what you're eating because you're excited, you're happy, you're talking to people, you might be a little tipsy, you don't have the same impulse control. A lot of times the alcohol itself can be full of sugar and you don't even notice. all in the context of something that's incredibly normal for people to do. You get excited, you get happy, you want to celebrate it, and it usually involves food. In this instance, it usually involves eating more on top of eating unhealthy, because most of the stuff you get at restaurants anywhere is fairly unhealthy. But you may also overdo it in terms of the amount you eat because of all those things we're talking about. You're excited, you're happy, you're not paying attention. You're not there to monitor your diet. You're there because you want to have a good time and celebrate a success for something. And this is true for almost any emotion you can imagine. If you're somebody that is conditioned to every time you go up or down, end up experiencing a craving for unhealthy food, every emotion has the potential to impact you negatively, whether it's positive, negative, neutral. Boredom is a real big one that we see frequently. My grandma always used to tell me that idle hands are the devil's tools. I never really got that until I got to grad school and realized that what she meant was if your mind is free to wander, you're probably going to find mischief. In the case of people with difficulties with dietary behaviors, if your mind is free to wander, it very frequently goes to food and unhealthy patterns of eating in terms of timing, content, all that kind of stuff. Stress is a real direct one. It's very easy to see how stress can facilitate negative dietary behaviors. In fact, it's probably the biggest thing. Stress in a generic term just means anything that forces you to adapt. That can be external, environmental, like, Eveline's bad day at work that we just talked about. It can also be internal. If you don't sleep enough, you don't sleep in a pattern that allows you to predict when you're going to bed, when you're getting up, it can be an internal stressor. It makes you feel like you had a terrible day at work before you've even gotten started because your body is off and all the sensations are negative. Happiness, sadness, like we talked about, contentment, anxiety. A lot of people do this when they're nervous. They'll eat, something that's unhealthy just out of habit. Loss, frustration, any sort of emotional deviation can be really, really negative in terms of its impact on your eating behaviors. The sneaky thing about this is that very, very frequently, if you ask somebody, hey, why did you just eat that? Emotion will be really far down their list. Sometimes they can identify like, hey, this is because I was very stressed and my day was terrible and this just makes me feel better. But most of the time, it's not something that occurs to you. It's because that's background noise. If you've learned to do this, it becomes almost invisible. So one of the ways you can unwind it is to track that. In any of the food monitoring that people may ask you to do as part of your participation in this program, it can help to just kind of write down what your emotional state was at any given point in time. This is a simple form that we hand out to a lot of people who ask, where were you and what were you doing when you ate or drank something? About how much did you have, informally, how much food or drink did you consume? What was your mood like before you started, and what was your mood like when you finished? Because this is also another sneaky thing that if you're eating to alleviate stress, most of the time we are not able to explicitly identify whether or not it worked. If you ate and you immediately felt better, that's a really easy way to condition that habit. But if you eat and you don't feel better, it's still an easy way to condition that habit if you don't notice. Because the short term, it seems like it ought to work. The longer term, you don't actually know if you don't monitor. And just as a thought exercise, a lot of people think, this is probably easy to unwind in retrospect. You just sit and think about it like, well, why do I eat? What are my emotions like in those situations? I can figure that out. Think about what you had for lunch a week ago Tuesday. I mean, chances are, unless you're already real deep in food monitoring as part of your participation in this program, you have absolutely no idea. Unless you record it, there's no way you can really remember or retain that. I mean, maybe not 100% of the time. If you went somewhere, there was an event, there was some reason you could remember, maybe, but most of the time you can't. You can't even remember what you consumed. It's extraordinarily difficult to remember the mood you were in at the time you consumed it. But if you write it down, it's real easy. You can always identify your emotional state at a given point in time if somebody asks. So you write it down when you eat, you associate those things, and then you can review them over time and maybe learn things about the way that you orient to these behaviors. I got an example on the next slide that shows that. If you look at Abilene's log, say Wednesday at 3:30, she's at work. She's having that day that we talked about a minute ago, where everything's stressful, people were mean, it was just really, really hard. She goes to the vending machine and gets 3 bags of M&Ms. She says she's angry, she's frustrated, she's overwhelmed, and the food is right there. You know, sugary, chocolatey goodness that she can just get for the loose change on her desk. So she gets the bags of M&Ms, she eats them all. She then feels afterwards guilty, sad, beating herself up about that behavior, and she's still angry. That's something that probably would not be apparent to her in the moment. That it takes review of these things over many, many different situations to realize that that happens. She ate primarily because she was angry, and when she got finished, she was still angry. It didn't work for the purposes that she tried to do it. You have another example that's probably, pretty typical for a lot of people. If you have kids and you take them places, you're always running to get them to their activities. The Saturday morning at 8:30, she's driving her kids to basketball practice. They didn't have time to eat before they left. They go to a drive-through and get sausage biscuits, sweet tea, and hash browns. She's frazzled, she's anxious, she's in a hurry. She eats 2 biscuits and 2 orders of hash browns, a big old glass of iced tea, and then scraps of whatever her kids didn't eat. And she has no idea what it was. She took in more food because she didn't want to waste it, which is a natural tendency, but she doesn't know what she consumed. And then at the end of this process, if she wrote it down, she might have noticed, I'm still frazzled and anxious. We did this to be quick so everybody could eat, and it was unhealthy. I overdid it. I don't know what I consumed, and I'm still frazzled. I'm still anxious. And then you might see like a celebratory note on there too, like Thursday at 7:30, took the kids out for pizza after they won their basketball game. Everybody's happy, they're excited, they're joyful. She had a bunch of pizza, cheesy breadsticks, sugary Coke, maybe some of them brownies that you get at some of the pizza places. No clue what she ate because she wasn't monitoring. She's doing like we said a minute ago, just having a nice time and celebrating an occasion, didn't pay attention. She notices when she gets home, like later afterward, when she thinks back, looking at her sheet, she's guilty. She's sad. She's anxious about these things. That her reasons for eating in the first place, like she's in a positive mood, the act of not paying attention and overdoing it actually stole that from her. Her positivity went away. And if you see, you can identify, you may identify this in yourself because you've noticed this of your own tendencies. This becomes a cycle. If I eat when I'm happy and that makes me sad, and I eat when I'm sad because I'm trying to be happy, and then when I eat because I'm trying to be happy, I then get sad, you just stay in a constant circle of activity that leads you to behaviors you know are not going to be very good for you. In Abilene's case, she made some notes down here at the bottom of the slide to say, when I get in a hurry, I make worse decisions about food. Sometimes I don't even notice what I'm eating. It's real easy to be distracted when things are going right and I don't pay attention. In most cases, though, I notice from what I monitored and I wrote down, overeating really doesn't help me very much. I don't feel better. And even when I feel good, I feel bad as a result of doing this. Sometimes just knowing that in the context of your thoughts, your behaviors, your feelings may help you to alter some of those things in a positive direction. And then, to follow up on Abilene in terms of what she learned from all of this, I'll just read you another description I have on my slides here. Although Abilene has had some insights about how emotions influence the way she eats, she also realizes that she's just starting to understand these things. She's learning that paying attention to simple things that she does every day, like eating, taking her kids places, going to work, can be really hard. It's important though, because if she's going to learn how to control these things better, she's going to have to be aware that they're happening. And the next section of stuff, which we'll pause before we get to, we'll see Abilene continue to build her skills in monitoring and dealing with those emotions, which gets her just one step closer to surgery, healthy lifestyle changes, and losing weight and keeping it off, long term. So I'll pause there for a second. I got a whole bunch more slides we can cover, but we can also go through questions or anything people might have to ask at this point. I'll give you a second to catch up too, as I know for me, typing is pretty slow. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. If anybody does have questions, just put them in there. Feel free to interrupt. I'll try to stop if I see them pop up. So in outlining that just a little bit, you can see Abilene is like making progress toward real behavioral and emotional changes. Her next section of stuff that she's trying to learn, she spent a couple weeks monitoring her eating with an emphasis on noticing her emotional reactions. She started to realize that the time, the place, the environment in which she eats, they all play very strong roles in determining how she eats, how much, and how she feels later. She's starting to get a handle on some aspects of this process, including those behavioral things that we talked about just a minute ago, eating more slowly, making sure she's not distracted. Now she's ready to move on to more advanced monitoring, particularly of how her emotional state and dietary behaviors affect her activity levels and her overall lifestyle. This is one of the things that constitutes the most change that you have to make as a result of surgery. The dietary part you can do. Everybody that supports you on your NMMC team is going to have suggestions and ways of helping you make those changes. Lifestyle is broader than just those dietary changes. You can do exactly what they tell you and still not learn to make lifestyle changes. You're trying to develop processes that give you a different orientation toward these problems. And like we talked about a minute ago, here's a whole bunch of stuff that plays a role in that. Your reasons for eating, your reactions to food, your eating habits and in accord with your emotions, the individual triggers for this sort of stuff. These next few slides constitute some of the observations we've had over doing thousands of these things over the last 12 or 13 years, these pre-surgical evaluations. We ask people, what are the patterns that you notice that get you into trouble, that lead you to overdo it with food or eat at the wrong times, eat the wrong things? These are things that people consistently tell us. When I made these slides, I went back over all of the old evaluations that I could get my hands on and tried to come up with the most common themes that people report to us. One is just food intake in general. They eat way bigger portions of unhealthy food late at night. Sometimes, like that's the only time in the course of a day that people sit down for a real meal. They may not eat at all until they get to dinner time, and then they sit down with their family and they way overdo it. And often that's unhealthy food, but way too much of it because they've been starving all day. Unhealthy lunches when not brought from home. People at work, like it is very, very common for them to be hectic all day. They don't have very long. They rush out to get something, and your easiest option at that point is fast food. Stuff that you know isn't good for you, but it's easy to obtain and it's quick. And then for whatever reason, an awful lot of people overdo it at brunch on weekends. You know, maybe like sleep in Sunday, get up and go have a meal between breakfast and lunchtime at about 11 o'clock. End up eating way too much food, way unhealthy food, forming bad habits around that. Also, emotions that are related to food that are super common for people to report is boredom. If you don't have anything else to do and you habitually eat when you experience negativity, well, boredom's pretty negative. People don't like it, and you end up doing this as a way to alleviate that state. Very frequently, this occurs at night when watching TV. A lot of people will say that, TV is kind of boring. I don't really like engaging in these things, but I have nothing else to do, so I do it anyway. Eating when stressed at work, work can be a major source of stress for most people. Even if you really like your job, it is probably not entirely free of stress because you have a lot of things that you have to get done. A lot of people also report that when work bleeds over into their other time, like, to be at home and be away from that, checking emails or trying to do stuff at home, that becomes even more stressful. It facilitates overeating or negative dietary choices. And overeating sweets or other bad foods when you're happy and celebrating. Like we talked about a few times at this point, it's real easy to just not pay attention when you're in a good mood. Also, activities. It is real common that people report I overdo it when I go to watch sports. Like, I live in Oxford and everybody comes in for the football games. Lately the baseball games, everybody's real excited about winning a national championship. They've had 3, 4 parades already in the last couple of weeks. Everybody gathers, they celebrate, they're excited, they eat bad, they drink bad, they're not engaged in monitoring. Kids' activities are the same way. If you have kids and you run them around, you often are in a real big hurry and you're trying to fit a whole lot into a very small amount of time. You don't pay attention. Work functions, same way. This is one that everybody that works in a big doctor's office probably has experienced at some point. I often wonder if this is like less in a clinic that focuses on weight loss, but people come from the drug companies and just leave like mountains of food. They bring all kinds of stuff for people to eat because they want to be let back in the building to talk to everybody that they're trying to market to. They bring all kinds of good stuff to eat, but most of it, unless somebody is really paying attention to what they leave at places, is not very healthy. Everybody's office, can engage in similar things. If you have somebody that likes to bake, but, makes 10 times as much as they can eat at home and brings it, it's real easy to engage in overeating on that basis. Parties, informal gatherings, that's the kind of stuff that leads people to make negative decisions. And then if you're healthy in your diet, it's real easy to form different associations with exercise. If you think I can do this, I can lose weight, you start to make healthy and positive dietary changes. You may also start to think I can get up and I can get moving. I can enhance my lifestyle and my weight loss from a couple directions at once. But it is never easy. This is especially not easy when you're out of shape. From my own example, I used to be in really good shape. I kickboxed, I ran about 10 miles a day, swam. I went to school in Hawaii, so I swam in the ocean all the time. I was in great shape. When I got overweight and I got out of shape, it was painful to go back because I tried to work out like I used to and I couldn't do it. I couldn't do anything close to it. And that realization, like, it made me sad. It made me defeated. I didn't try to get to it as much because it was aversive at first. But that's only at first. If you form positive associations and better habits, you often can condition yourself to have a really different attitude toward this. How you think about these things can greatly influence your behavior. For example, this is like this triangle for people who are trying to lose weight that are experiencing all that negativity I just talked about. Hey, I'm already watching my diet. I don't need to do this. Exercise isn't going to make that big a difference anyway. I already hurt. My joints ache. I'm tired. Exercise is going to make this worse. You get discouraged. You start to feel tense, heavy, angst-ridden. And then your behavior is to avoid. The same way it is for all negative emotions, like we talked about a minute ago, it's easier to check out and to avoid. And maybe you even rationalize to yourself, like, I'm just going to wait. I'm not like quitting or avoiding entirely. I'm waiting until I lose some more weight. And then maybe you don't follow the plan that everybody at NMMC is trying to help you develop. You do things that are different than what they recommended. Alternatively, if you change your thoughts just slightly, you can experience exactly the same situation and not have the same negative outcome or reaction. Soreness, pain, knowing that you're not doing that great when you first start can be an indication to think something like, well, I'm going to work my way up to this. I can't do a lot now, but if I keep at it and I chip away a little bit more every day, I'm going to be better at this. And this is a tool that's going to help me reach my goals. Diet is one component. Exercise is really good and really healthy, independent of weight loss. And I might be sore, I might hurt, but this is going to be worth it. So then as a consequence, you have more energy for these activities. You might have a higher heart rate when you work out. You're more relaxed. You're excited, a little nervous, but you're oriented positively. And as a result, you monitor your progress, you build up endurance, you may even learn new things, new exercises, new sports, new activities, stuff that's actually enjoyable to you. You develop a routine. Eventually, that routine can become positive. What started out as extremely negative or difficult, now you don't want to go a day or two without it because it's such an important component of positivity. And then also expectations. This is one of the other things that we're actually trying to conduct research on in my capacity as a college professor. How does your expectation for what's going to happen as a result of this surgery influence your actual weight loss? Because if you think about how much weight you expect to lose in like a week or a month of dieting, 5 pounds, like 20 in a month, more. A lot of times when you've gone a long period that you lose weight really fast and then regain it, maybe even regain more than you lost, you don't have real clear expectations about what normal weight loss is. We frequently hear people say, I want to be half my size in 6 months. And even if that's possible, it's usually not particularly healthy. And most of the time, like to lose that kind of weight, you'd have to starve to such a degree that you're malnourished. It's not anything that anybody in your healthcare team wants for you. Sustainable weight loss, at least in behavioral terms, is about 1 to 2 pounds a week, like 8 pounds or so a month. Now, after surgery, you're going to lose in most cases quite a bit faster than that, at least for the first month or two. But that's a little different. When you're trying to get active and lose weight behaviorally, especially before surgery, 1 to 2 pounds is all you really want. More than that, and you actually have the propensity to regain it kind of fast. It's easy to drop a lot really fast if you try to starve yourself in an unhealthy way, but it comes back just as rapidly. So if you hold these expectations, you think I'm supposed to lose 5 pounds a week every week for the whole time I'm on this diet. Your thoughts when you don't lose 5 pounds might be something like, well, I must be a failure. I'm really not doing enough because I didn't lose what I was supposed to lose. Or, if you're post-surgery, you're like 5, 6 months out, you're probably not going to lose weight at the same rate you did immediately after the surgery. Slow and steady from that point. You might have the thought, well, this surgery was useless. I didn't lose 5 pounds this week, so this is bad. I'm never going to achieve my goals. You might end up developing tension or anxiety, nausea, your heart rate goes up, you could even panic as a result, and your behavior is very frequently going to be to avoid. You quit monitoring, you quit exercising, you quit communicating with your providers. What we see in research really, really often is the people that do best are the ones that come in for their recommended follow-up appointments. Short term, like most people do it, because you just had surgery, you need to make sure you're okay, that everything went right. You're going to work with your dietary team to know when it's okay to start to eat regular foods again. But the longer you go, the more people just stop. They don't do that. And when they do that, they don't end up having as good outcomes. They may regain weight or not do as well over time because they're not coming back into contact with the people that helped them. Alternatively, if your expectations are not out of whack with reality, you may have an easier time forming positive associations. Your realistic expectations are like 1 or 2 pounds a week. When you lose a pound, you think, wow, nice job. I've lost another pound. This is great. These changes are working. I want to keep this up. I want to have a slow, steady lifestyle change that allows me to reach my goals. And I can do it. If my goal is 1 pound a week and you see progress in that direction, you learn that you can do it. And then your feelings are strongly positive. You're motivated, you're energized, you might even be, proud of yourself for the progress that you made and the adaptations that you've engaged in. It's easier then to form healthy habits. You continue monitoring yourself, you attend your follow-up appointments, you meet with your surgeon, your dietary team, your entire healthcare provider group. You have checks on what you're doing to make sure you're optimizing your health. And it tends to keep people a whole lot more consistent with their plan. So a lot of other things that can influence your realistic expectations for weight loss. A lot of people get super hung up on a number on the scale. It goes down, they're happy. It goes up even slightly, they're unhappy. But this depends on a lot of stuff. Your GI function, your constipation, your bloating, the time of day that you weigh. But we frequently hear from people that they're weighing, many times a day. In general, that's something behaviorally that we would rather people not do. You do it once at the same time every day, you can have a way better chance of getting a sense of realistic trends because it's pretty close to the same conditions. It can matter if you have all your clothes on or not. It can matter if you just drank something. Like these minor deviations can be meaningful if you're looking for like 0.2 pounds change on the scale. It's also like not necessarily the only variable that you want to track. Your goal is definitely to lose weight, to bring yourself to a body mass index that is within a healthy range. But you also are going to change in composition. Your shape is going to change. Your clothes are going to change. Take pictures to remind yourself of that sort of progress. Take measurements. Get an elastic tape measure and actually measure yourself over time. Knowing how much smaller you are, irrespective of what you weigh, is often reinforcing to increase your behavior. It's also the case as you get closer to like a healthy body weight and you exercise more, you may end up like gaining muscle mass. A cubic inch of muscle weighs a whole lot more than a cubic inch of fat. So your weight on a scale when you're healthy could actually start to increase in some situations, and it is not a negative thing at all. It means that you're developing lean body mass and you're becoming healthy. So to conclude all of this, we got more examples for Aveline. Her current weight, which came in, was 265 pounds. And before she learned any of this information, she just said, I want to cut that in half. But when we asked her, what do you want to weigh in a year? She said, half my body weight. I want to lose 132 pounds, 132 and a half pounds. It's a goal, but it's probably not a realistic goal. And if she holds it in mind and she sees she's not making it, she's going to engage in all that negativity we just talked about. But after listening to something like this, after talking to her dietitian, her healthcare team, she forms a more realistic goal. Well, maybe 70 pounds. You know, if I got 52 weeks in a year, 1 to 2 pounds, I'll just average 1.5, and then I'll round that down to give myself a little bit of room. 70 pounds, realistic outcome. We can also track that real specifically. One of the things we do when y'all come in for a psyche eval with us is enter all your information into this fancy computer program that predicts your likelihood of various outcomes. Some of those things are based on hundreds of thousands of people who are matched to you for your age, your gender, your ethnicity, your health habits, and have gone through the same surgery. So on average, like what do people experience? You see over here on this left side picture, risk of complications for Abilene as she undergoes surgery. I didn't tell you this, but she's also in her mid 40s and has type 2 diabetes, which is, elevates some of these things a little bit. On the right there is the graph that most people are a lot more interested in. What's going to happen over time? We can actually predict with a reasonable degree of accuracy that if you do what your healthcare team tells you and the surgery goes like it's supposed to, approximately how much weight you're going to lose, based on hundreds of thousands of other people that have done this before. You can see here for Abilene, that line is real steep in the beginning. Those first couple of months, she loses a lot of weight. I mean, by month 3, she's down 32.23 pounds. A substantial amount from where she started. Then it levels off over time. It becomes slower. You have to work a little harder to maintain momentum. At the end of the year, it's predicted she's going to lose 68.41 pounds, almost right on what she said she expected. When her mind is in line with the actual environment and the likely outcome, if she listens to her healthcare team's advice, it becomes real easy to get all that moving in the right direction. It's simpler to do what you're asked to do if you know that it's going to work and you have an expectation that's realistic. This is just kind of an aside, but it's a good one. A lot of people are surprised to know that a lot of their health conditions may reverse themselves. It is not at all uncommon for things like elevated blood pressure or sleep apnea, acid reflux, or even diabetes as you approach a normal weight to just disappear. This is something else that we calculate when you come in for an assessment. It's a probability that that will happen for you. You see here, these are the health conditions that are just kind of arbitrarily assigned to Abilene when we were making this up. She's got almost a 60% chance that she won't need to take high blood pressure medication anymore. She's got a 61% chance that she won't need her CPAP anymore. 53% chance that her acid reflux will go away, and over 80% chance that her diabetes won't be a problem anymore. For most of us that experience those kinds of health conditions, that by itself is huge. You feel better, you have your mind in the right direction, you are very, very likely to be able to have a lot more energy and enthusiasm for positive life changes. So for Abilene, like her vision for life after surgery at this point is now starting to come together. And for the first time in a really long time, she believes that her participation in a program like this is going to make change possible. She knows that working to make lifestyle changes now, before the surgery, is going to be much easier than waiting to do it after the surgery. So she's doing everything she can to follow her whole healthcare team's instructions, especially for dietary change and self-monitoring. Also paying attention to the impact of her emotions on her diet, her physical activity, and making sure she keeps in mind accurate expectations for weight loss. As she gets closer and closer to surgery, she's learning more about how to keep on that path to health improvement. And if you pay attention to any more of these presentations that we're going to have online in the very near future, um, problem-solving strategies to make life a little bit easier in making those adjustments. Okay, so that's about all of the information to cover. Does anybody have any questions?
It's question one of the patients they wanted to know, do you believe that stress is an overall cause of being overweight?
Yeah, firmly. I mean, there's a really, really good behavioral history of showing that stress facilitates negative health behaviors. You really only, as an organism, not as a human, but just as any organism, only have a few things you can do natively to feel better. Sleep, sex, and food. That's it. And often, as humans that live in a culture where food is so readily available, eating's the one that we pick. Stress is a massive source of conditioning those negative health behaviors that we talked about. Which is, kind of the way people like me, fit into this. Is we can teach you methods of dealing with stress. They're not always easy, but they are usually effective if you use them. That's an interesting question too. Will emotions change drastically after surgery? For a lot of people, yes. And most of those, if you do what you're supposed to do, are in a very positive direction. I mean, who wouldn't like to have more energy, more ability to go do stuff, and often less social anxiety? It's not at all uncommon for people to be socially anxious about the way that they look when they're overweight. They feel conspicuous and negative when they interact with people. That kind of goes away. And as you become more energetic, you do more stuff, your mood is higher, a lot of things are positive. What we also find though is that if you're not attentive to that stuff, you don't do what your healthcare team says, you don't come in for your follow-up appointments or monitor your lifestyle changes, you can have negative effects. That a couple years out, you can actually see elevations in depression and in particular substance use, which nobody wants, even in the short term, but things that you can trip up a little bit if you don't pay attention to it. On average, though, like it's extremely positive. Being lighter, being healthier, being more active has really, really good implications for your emotional state. And then I guess one other random aside that probably your healthcare team is going to tell you about way more than me. Um, Hormonal changes for women can sometimes induce short-term depression. As you lose weight, some of your hormones may go out of whack just a little bit, and you can have uh, sadness, depression, crying spells, really for no reason other than your hormones just take a minute to adjust. It's not completely unlike what happens postpartum, like right after having children. Other stuff?
All right. Someone has a question that says, would you suggest to start food monitoring even if we're not required to do weight management, maybe just to help pinpoint what the issue may be?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, we suggest that to literally everybody, whether or not you're asked to, or whether or not it's a formal criterion for surgery. It's always a good idea. What you monitor makes it much, much easier to control that sort of stuff. And there's a couple really great programs you can get for that are completely free. MyFitnessPal, that's put out by Under Armour, has a database of millions of different foods. And then there's one that we've been looking at in the recent past that I don't know, y'all may actually use it in the clinic, Veritastic. it's made for people going through programs just exactly like what you're doing now, and has all kinds of tools to support lifestyle change. I haven't actually read that about taste buds changing. From my understanding, perception wise, that doesn't usually have a lot to do with hormones. That's actually like stays pretty constant until at least you're older, or if you're a smoker, you can change that. But in general, those things are learning history and acquisition. It doesn't change that much. But y'all, Vivian, Ginger, you may know different. I don't know from a biological level.
Well, we do have patients to say that their taste buds change, mainly because like they'll start the pre-surgery diet, and the 4 days before surgery, they're on liquids and they're using protein shakes.
Mhm.
So they may have Premier Protein, Fairlife, or a different kind there at the house that they've been using and really like the flavor. After surgery, they get home that Thursday night and they're like, I could not drink but 1 ounce. It was just horrible, or it was too sweet, or so the taste buds, it's just a little bit more heightened. So things are extremely sweet or salty, but that's something that changes, but it's not forever. Things kind of come back from that standpoint. But once you start on a regular diet, you may notice that things that you ate prior to having surgery, it just doesn't taste the same, or it's just not as appeasing to you. So,
Yeah. Yeah, tons of that in behavioral research too. Is if you don't eat something that's kind of unhealthy or really fatty, really sugary for a while, and then you do, you have a real different reaction to it. It kind of makes sense in this case. You're trying to get healthy and you're going a long time on a liquid diet, that you'd have some short-term changes. Other questions for anything?
right. So someone wanted to know about hair loss. So after surgery, a lot of people, well, prior to surgery, they ask that question, but not just bariatric surgery, but the stress of a surgery by itself can cause hair shedding. You shed hair every day. So around the fourth or sixth month after surgery, you may see some hair shedding, but it's short-lived unless you're not up on your protein. So for patients who from the coming out of the gate struggle with maintaining their protein goals and it just continues, then yes, you will have some hair shedding that's probably would be longer than the person who had surgery and have consistently met goals on protein.
Mhm.
So protein is very important.
Yeah, and following up and like doing what your dietary team tells you. It's like if you're monitoring that and you know you're getting adequate amounts, like you're way less likely to experience those kind of outcomes. Yeah, a lot of times that's the kind of thing. Sorry, the question is, what are your thoughts if somebody's doing better, making better choices, but not seeing any progress or losing weight the way that they need to? That's the thing that is most discouraging for people as they try to progress. It leads to that negative emotional spiral like we're talking about. I think about it two ways. One is you haven't seen changes in the scale yet. And part of that may be because you're gaining muscle at the same time that you're losing fatty tissue. But for some people, it just takes a minute. That 2 or 3 months before you condition your body to really benefit from exercise is not weird, but it's a long time to keep up your efforts in the absence of any sort of reinforcement. If you do it though, and you find reinforcement in the activity itself rather than the outcome, then you got two reasons to do it. If you know down the line this is going to lead to losing weight and being healthier, and I've actually started to enjoy it and it makes my life better, those things converge. They give you lots and lots of reinforcement to keep it up. which is a lot harder when it's not working the way that you want it to. It's tough.
Dr. Young, what are your thoughts about Noon, the weight loss program that uses cognitive behavior therapy?
Yeah, they actually do a pretty reasonable approximation of real cognitive behavioral therapy, at least better than everything else that I've reviewed to try to find similar products out there. Real CBT is not quite like that because it is truly individualized. You know, we have these sets of principles, sort of like what we've been talking about, to try to help on a general level, but then you individualize it for the person and their context and their environment, which is just impossible to do for everybody on a computer program. But you can learn to do it yourself, taking those general principles and adapting them to work for your own local environment. And as near as I can tell, you know, it's doing a pretty decent job of that. The coolest thing that you see when you look at their site is one of the things that they highlight are research studies. They're not just saying that this stuff works, they've actually given it out to independent laboratories in various areas of the country and tested it. They have evidence that it works. You can be a lot more confident with something like that than, you know, any of the other dietary things that you see people try to sell you.
Any more questions?
All right, well, y'all are not limited to this moment either. If you go home and think about this stuff and have other questions, you know, feel free to shoot me an email, call the clinic. We're happy to help however we can.
Well, I have a few that's on the question and answer panel.
Yeah, yeah.
So they want to know, people with depression, is it possible for depression to get worse?
As a result of the surgery.
I'm assuming, yes.
I mean, potentially, like we talked about in some of those hormonal changes, you know, particularly for women, you know, under the age of about 40, it wouldn't be weird in the short term, but if you know it's coming, you know what's happening, you know why, it generally tends to minimize the impact. In terms of like behavioral and lifestyle changes, usually like everything that you're going to do differently after surgery is exactly what we would tell people to do that come in and they're depressed and they don't have any problem with their weight. You're going to get up more, you're going to be more active, you're going to be engaged in things that you want to do, you're going to feel better. That is essentially the cognitive behavioral cure for depression. So it'd be real weird if it affected you negatively if you do what people are telling you to do.
And staying positive is a big thing
Yep.
because we educate you on what you need to do after surgery, and we started that from the first visit. So it's very important that you stay positive. You're doing it for a reason. That's why you came to see us. We want you to have great results, but you have to stay positive and know and plan. Don't wait until you have the surgery to try to decide how you're going to manage getting protein and fluid in when you go back to work, or how, you know, what are you going to do? Start planning now, trying to work out a plan to where you can still meet your goals and not stress yourself, because if you're stressed, then even without having surgery, you will have problem with getting food down and different things because your muscles are tense, you're stressed. So start planning now. Please
That's
do not wait until after the surgery.
we try to tell everybody, like it is way easier to make behavioral changes this side of the scalpel than the other one. You know, you have a lot more resources. I see something pop up for like if any family tries to talk you out of going through with the whole process. You know, that happens sometimes, and often it's just because people are nervous about surgery in general. What I can tell you from outcome studies are that this is by far the most scientifically based method of long-term weight loss. Almost nothing else has been shown to work over the long term, and this does. it also, like scientifically, on the basis of going on about 1 million people in the big centralized database that tracks this stuff, really, really low rates of complications or negative outcomes. Not none, not zero. Every surgery has risks, but this one, as far as risks go, are way lower than an awful lot of other things, particularly the kinds of things that would happen to you if you don't lose weight. You end up with heart trouble, metabolic trouble, GI difficulties. All that stuff is much, much worse than the physical impact of a surgery like this. What I try to encourage people to do is take into account the considerations of the people around you, but also realize that it's your life and your health. You have to decide. So what you value and what you think is going to help for your own personal condition is so much more important than anybody else. And often, if you think about the reason that your relatives, your friends, your family are worried about you, it's because they're worried about you. They want you to be healthy and happy, and they think this is dangerous. But if they think a little broader, they'll get over it. You go through with it and you lose weight and you feel better and you're healthy, that's not going to be a big deal long term. Vivian, you said you had some other questions. I think they must be on a list that I can't see.
Yeah, on the question and answer list, I don't think you can see that. Ginger, would you like to answer that question about struggling with not drinking with your meals?
Sure. So if you are pre-surgery, I really don't encourage people to try that right now because it is extremely hard. Um, because for post-surgery, you're going to be on liquids only, 4 or 5 weeks to the day from surgery. When we start adding back soft textured proteins, it's just going to be a bite or two, and that's reintroducing solid foods after not having anything solid on your stomach for about 6 weeks. So it's not going to take very much, maybe 2 or 3 bites. So that's when we start, don't drink anything 15 minutes prior, and you have to wait to 30 minutes after. So it's really extremely hard for people to do it pre-surgery. So there's other things that I'd rather you start working on, like not drinking your calories, getting into an exercise habit, really looking at the types of food, not just you eat, but we eat as a society, and trying to choose more real foods. Or you don't eat but 2 meals a day. I'd rather you try to start eating 3 meals with at least a protein 3 times a day, rather than focus on not eating and drinking, because we're going to go over that, and not to sound awful, but from what I understand is you will do that one time after surgery and you'll never do it again. Because it will make you sick. So there's other habits that we can work on during the pre-surgery period, weight management period, that you could put more effort into. I don't think it's going to be that difficult after surgery to not eat and drink. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I mean, you're already going so long, like to recondition all that stuff, you're kind of starting from scratch at that point.
Yeah. So focus on the other things, like I said, eating 3 times a day. It doesn't have to be big. At least a little bit of protein at each meal. Starting your exercise habit. Getting off all the liquid calories. Those are 3 big things that you really want to do right before or during your weight management period. Do you want me to answer the next one, Vivian?
Yes, you can answer that one.
Okay, the next question was, does 0-calorie drinks count toward the 64 ounces water that is supposed to be consumed? So it's not just water for 64 ounces. It is any and all non-carbonated, sugar-free fluids. They all count towards your 64 ounces of fluids every day. My kind of rule of thumb, if you want to know if you can drink something, make sure it does not have any bubbles in it. It doesn't spew when you open it. It does not have any carbonation. And you look at calories. And if it's got more than 10 calories, you do not drink it. The only thing that does not count towards your 64 ounces of fluid after surgery is anything with protein in it. So that will be separate. But it's not just water for your 64 ounces. I mean, of course, water is the best thing for you. However, it doesn't have to be just water for 64 ounces. I have a whole list. So when you see me, I give you a whole list of all the things that you can choose to go towards your 64 ounces.
Yeah, lists are great. Yeah, explicit indicators, you hang on to that stuff. I see a question in my chat box for, is it better to drink room temperature versus cold water? I don't think I've read anything, at least from a behavioral perspective, that says it makes a difference, but y'all may know differently from a biological perspective.
Well, right after the surgery, some people are sensitive to cold things. It makes them have spasms, esophageal spasms, but and some people drink cold things and said that warm things, causes the spasm. So it's just individualized on the patient. After surgery, cold things make me spasm. So for about the first 3 weeks, I didn't do cold liquids. I would set my protein drinks out and make sure that they were room temperature before I would drink them. With the protein drinks, the ready-made ones, when you have it in the refrigerator, they're really thick when they're cold. So it kind of thins them out if it's room temperature.
The room temperature protein, that's delicious. Yeah, I didn't think of that one, but that makes some degree of sense. It's almost like, with everything else, you're introducing small changes and trying to see how it affects your body. And if, you experience spasms or something, you avoid it. Same way with foods. If you get sick, you take your time trying to get back to those things.
And it's also important too. I know Ginger, she tells our patients to make sure that when she do her discharge call on Thursdays, she will tell them to go ahead and try to do 30 grams of protein that night after discharge. So that way you can kind of get a taste of things to see, well, do I like the protein shake that I was drinking before I had surgery? And she always encouraged the patients to have two forms of protein at home because you may have been doing Premier Protein, but after surgery, you may not be able to do that. So you need to have something else there so that way you're not stuck with no protein. Protein is a must from a standpoint of healing, energy, your hair, all of it. So you need to make sure you have two forms of protein at home. So that way you're not stuck with, I can't stand that Premier Protein and I don't have anything else at home and I'm at home by myself and I don't have a way to get anything else. Always be prepared. So plan ahead.
And Premier has about 7,000 different flavors too. If you could probably find a whole bunch of different ones and mix them up. I kind of feel like at this point I should be a sponsor for them. I go through so much of it.
Ginger, what about the Core Power Complete Protein Shakes?
Everybody loves, the Core Power Elite or the Fairlife 30 gram.
The Core Power, it's made by Coke.
Yeah, the
If I'm
Core
not
Power
mistaken.
Elite, there's 3 different versions of it. There's a 26 gram, a 24 gram, and a 42 gram. The one that you want to choose is the 42 gram because it's got less carbs in it. Plus, you don't have to drink as much, volume wise, after surgery. So you would only have to do 1.5 of those versus 2.5. And remember, nothing with protein in it will count towards your 64 ounces, so it's extra. So what we try to do is offer the lowest amount of volume for the most amount of protein, especially right at first. So that's why when you have your surgery date, you also have a pre-surgery education day that we do, and we go over every protein supplement ready-made that is in our guidelines. And I also send you an email with all the protein supplements you can choose, whether it's ready-made or powder. So you will have it.
Yeah, that's awesome. You have like a email, it becomes a whole lot easier.
Yes, it does. That last question, how long do you have to be on a liquid diet before surgery? The liquid diet before surgery is only 4 days. 4 days prior to surgery, we do surgeries on Tuesdays, so it will be the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. You will have any and all of the non-carbonated, sugar-free clear liquids, unlimited, and then you will drink one of the protein supplements at breakfast, lunch, and supper all 4 days. So the liquid diet is not 2 weeks, it is only 4 days. I don't know where everybody gets 2 weeks from, but
There's great variability in that, especially like cross studies in different countries. You know, they have a lot of them, 2 weeks are standard, but in, you know, there's direct evidence to suggest that that's completely unnecessary.
well, and I don't know who could do that unless we wired their mouth shut. You know, I mean that's really hard to just do 2 weeks of just liquids. I mean,
Yeah, you're going to be irritable at that point.
mentally, I don't know if anybody could do that. So it's just 4 days. 4 days. That's it.
Were there more questions on your list?
Ginger, what about organic protein?
Like the why can I not think of that name? Organic. I can see the package. I can see the box. Yes, you can, but again, a lot of protein supplements out there have a lot of sugar in them, and I'm talking about total grams of carbohydrate, not just total sugars or added sugars. So you really have to look at the label. You want roughly about 30 grams to 40 grams for one serving, or one, just say, box or a scoop, because of the volume issue right after surgery. You want less than 10 grams of total carbohydrate. So if you can find one that's organic, there are a few out there. But like I said, right now I can see the marketing. I can see that, but I can't read the letters off my top of my head. So if it falls in our guidelines, sure. I mean, people bring me stuff every day. And I'll be the first to admit that I don't know every single one out there that falls into our guidelines, because there's just too many out there, and there's something new coming on the market every day. So those are our guidelines. You don't want more than about 40 grams of protein at one time. Your body doesn't absorb more than about 40 grams of protein at one time. So it's like I tell everybody, you don't want to go and get one of those, BCAA collagen, whatever, 90 grams of protein per scoop, because you just have real expensive urine. Your body gets rid of it through your kidneys. And so you want to stick to about 30 or 40 grams per serving.
Yeah, in all likelihood, if that is an organic product, it probably costs like 5 times
Yes.
what it should for protein, because there's a lot of chemicals involved in the digestion of those amino
Absolutely.
acids.
Organic is not always healthiest.
Yeah.
But again, I will say, I mean, if we can find one, if that's something that you're interested in, I will research and we will find one that fits into our guidelines. But you will not be dependent on protein supplements for the rest of your life because that's not a lifestyle change. So by about 9 or 10 weeks out after surgery, I have you weaned off all the protein supplements. I want you to know that you can get the full 60 to 70 grams of protein from food, from your protein foods. Now, if here and there you need a protein shake, sure, but not absolutely dependent on it, because what happens a lot of times is down the road, we have pretty much beat into your heads that you have to get the 60 to 70 grams of protein in. That is not an option. And so what happens is you drink your protein shakes and go, well, I've got that in. Now I can choose poor quality foods. And that's when you start seeing the weight loss stop and gaining the weight back. So, like I said, here and there, absolutely. But not dependent on them. And like I say, you know, there's not one restaurant out there that has Premier Protein on their menu. We're not going to not go out to eat. That's part of our culture. So you have to be able to take concepts, good quality food concepts, wherever you go.
Yeah, I guess that's really like the thing from a behavioral perspective too. So you're trying to learn processes, not specific rules. You want to know the rules, be familiar with them. You want to do, you know, especially immediately post-surgery, what you're told, but you're really trying to learn broader perspectives, not
Right.
individual behaviors.
Right. You want to eat good nutrition, good quality foods. And that's how we all should be eating. We don't. Man has pretty much ruined our food. And we're all suffering from it. It's a bunch of chemicals that our bodies can't process, don't know how to process, and it's a bunch of sugar that our body doesn't know how to process as much as we take in every day. So it's all about a lifestyle change.
All right, any more questions? Well, if not, Dr. Young, we really appreciate you taking time to join us tonight.
I'm
And of
happy to
course-
do it. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're always welcome and you do a great job all the time. So thanks a lot for doing that. And for the attendees, if you do have more questions, feel free to call our office at 662-377-7546. All right, everyone, have a good night. And thank you again, Dr. Young.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.